Hello and welcome to this Innova Systems webinar with me, Adam Rose. In this video we're going to have a look at FeatureWorks within SolidWorks. First of all, I'll just run through what FeatureWorks is and what it allows us to do. FeatureWorks allows us to import any model into SolidWorks, and I'll just open up the SolidWorks system so we can have a look at the options. You'll see that from the file types we can open, there are a variety of different file types, including STEP and IGES as the more common ones. Any of those files that we open up that have solid data within them, we can use FeatureWorks to run through and do a feature recognition. It allows us to pick up on a design tree within a model that previously didn't have one. So for an imported model, whenever we export something out of SolidWorks, we lose the design tree. Well, FeatureWorks allows us to read something back in again and then gain that feature history back again in some kind of way that allows us to then edit the model. So the first thing I'm going to do is to turn on FeatureWorks within SolidWorks. I go to the Tools menu and down to Add-ins, and I need to make sure that FeatureWorks is turned on. And you'll see that you've got a selection box on the left and on the right. Once you've got FeatureWorks activated, we can then open up an existing model. Within this folder, I'm going to choose STEP as the file type. Right, so we can use any file type, but it's just for this example I've used STEP. So we click on Options to then have a look at the import options for this particular file. You'll see that we've got options about how the actual model is imported, whether it's imported as surfaces or solids. Okay, we've got the Tri-Forming Solid option on, which is an option that you need on in order to run through FeatureWorks. You need a solid design, you need a solid lump of geometry. And B-rep mapping is the quickest way for SolidWorks to form that solid geometry. We've also got options to import multiple bodies as parts, and if you've got a multi-body design which is intersecting with the multiple bodies, it's useful to do this to allow us to then use FeatureWorks on those multiple bodies. We've also got the options to perform a full entity check and run import diagnostics, which basically allows us to pick up on and heal any errors within the design. We've got more specific options about how we want the units and tick boxes for individual options for each file type. But what I'm going to do is to just click OK. I'll select the first file and I'll click Open, and it will run through, and the first thing it asks me is whether I want to run import diagnostics. We can see that with import diagnostics on this particular model that there aren't any faulty faces in the design. So we can hit the tick and we can continue. If you did have any faults within the model, you click Attempt to Heal All, or you can use some more specific options to try and get rid of the errors within the model. It then gives us a more robust design to then go on and work with. So the next option is FeatureWorks asking us whether we want to proceed with feature recognition. And I'm going to click Yes. First of all, we've got the recognition mode, and I'm going to show you the automatic recognition mode to start off with. Automatic is the simplest way for SolidWorks to pick out different areas in the design. I'm using a standard part model, so this would be standard features rather than sheet metal features. It's not a sheet metal design. And the recognition, well, I want to recognize all of these items, and I'll turn all of them on apart from volumes, which we'll have a look at later on. All I do is hit the next button. It goes through and it tries to recognize all of the parts of the design, and it gives you a list of what it's come out with. So we can see down this list, it highlights the different areas of the model. Okay, so I'll hit the tick and we'll go through and we'll have a look at that results. So starting at the top of the design, we start first of all with a simple boss extrude. Two cuts are taken on either side, and we've got simple cuts on each side of the design, and then a draft applied to those outside edges. Counterbore is inserted on the end, and it's nicely recognised that hole. We've also got the holes inserted on the edge here, but you'll notice they haven't got the countersunk edge on there. Fillets on the underside. Then the chamfers are applied around the top of these holes. So rather than it being a countersunk, it's just a standard hole with a chamfer applied. And it's got that same feature around the top and a second fillet on these corners. So in this particular design, there's some changes that I might want to make. The first one of which is the fact that, in several parts of the design, we'd have, say, patterns where we'd have these two holes, patterned possibly with a linear pattern or a mirror, or these two areas of the design would be mirrored over. You may also want to adjust it so rather than having a chamfer around these edges, you've actually got them inserted as countersunk holes. So we'll have a look at some of the automatic options that allow us to slightly adjust the result. So I'll close down this model. It then takes us back to that imported design, where we can run FeatureWorks for a second time. I'll right click and I'll select from the FeatureWorks menu the options button first of all. Within here we've got options in the general tab about whether we're creating a new part or not. The resize tool allows us to switch the order in which things are recognized. So it goes down this list and tries to pick up the features at the top of the list first. Advanced controls allows us to make more specific changes to the design. One of the more advanced changes I'm going to make is to turn off the option to combine fillets, chamfers and holes, which allows us to make smaller changes about how we want things to be grouped. It's also quite useful to use the holes that are in the model to be recognized as hole wizard holes. The other options we'll have a look at later on. So in this design now, having adjusted those options, I'll right click again to bring up recognized features this time. In this design, I'll leave it on automatic, but before I do anything further, I want to select the areas that I want to recognize first of all. And they get selected in the local recognition entities box. So I'll select the holes within the model, and then I'll untick everything from the list apart from holes. We're then isolating those elements of the model which we want to be recognized as holes, so that they will be recognized first. And you'll see that then it's picked up the two holes and they're displayed separately, and also that counterbore hole on the end. For the rest of the design, we've got an unrecognized body, so we can just hit the back button just to go back and actually recognize the rest of it. So to go through the rest of the design, I'll use the automatic mode now, because the rest of the recognition that it picked up worked fairly well. So I can just select all of these options back on again, and then go through to the next screen to then have everything else recognized within the model. And it does that same recognition as before, but this time it hasn't grouped items automatically. So we can go through the design and we can group items ourselves. For example, we've got these two cut extrudes on the far ends of the model. We can use find patterns for these items to then pick up on, say, a mirror feature within the model. So I can pick up on the mirror features on either side, hit the next button, and it says it's found one mirror. And it shows us that within the design. Okay, we can then see those features. The next part of the model, we've got the fillets on the underside, which we can combine manually if we want to. And likewise for the chamfers on either end. The fillets around the top also need to be combined, and we just select them with the Shift key and then click Combine to group them together. And then you'll see we're left with those holes. So for these holes, we also want to find patterns in those areas. To be able to pick up the patterns of a linear pattern, I'll select linear and then put it on interactive. All that I do is I select the two items in this linear pattern and click the next button, it should go through and recognize that pattern, which it has. So by manually adjusting the options, actually at this stage we can pick up things like mirrors and patterns and simplify the design down. So just by using the automatic features within the model, we can actually pick up quite a lot, and we can get it quite accurate as to how the model would have been built. So now if I roll back through the design, you'll see the boss extrude first of all, with the cuts and that mirror we've inserted on either end. Draft applied on the outside of the design, with then the large fillets on the underside. You see those chamfers, those smaller fillets around the top. This time the holes going through the model are inserted as countersunk holes and then patterned, and we've got the counterbore inserted on the end. So this time we've got quite an accurate model, something that looks quite a lot like how we want it to. So what I'm going to do now is to close down this example and just have a look at another example we can bring up within FeatureWorks. The second example I'll just drag into the graphics area from my file explorer, and it reads it in the same, and then we just need to run through import diagnostics. Okay, if you've got no errors, you can just hit the tick. So having opened up FeatureWorks a second time, what I'm going to do now is to switch to sheet metal features, and I'm going to show you how to work with this model in interactive mode. So in interactive mode, we can select from a list the available features we want to try and recognize. What we tend to do in interactive mode is just pick the items that we would have added last if we were actually constructing this design. So an obvious one is the hem features, which are added around this top side, and we can recognize those one by one. So you almost have to think in reverse as you're building this model. The next thing obviously would be the edge flanges, and I'll take away this edge flange here, and we can also take away other edge flanges if we want to. We'd simply just select things and click recognize, and they're removed from the model, so that then we can isolate on just the items we want to look at. The next things I'll deal with is the holes through the base of the model. We need to switch to standard features to pick these up, because you'll see we've only got the sheet metal features here. So under standard features, we can pick up things like cut extrudes. I want to pick up the cut extrude that goes through the model just here, and all I do is just right click on this entity and click select tangency to select that entire loop. We then need to define how far this cut is going to go through the model. So we select the face where it ends. We probably have it going up to a face like this one. SolidWorks can sometimes recognize patterns in these areas, and we can select to say a circular pattern type, and it will sometimes try and pick up those circular patterns. So all we do is we click the next button, goes through the design, and it tells us that it couldn't recognize pattern for this particular item, but we can keep the feature. And you can check what you've got at this point if you want to. Okay, so I'll go back and deal with the rest of the model. So the rest of the cut extrudes, I'll turn off recognize patterns this time because it didn't work the first time, and I'll just go through that selection that I made before and just select it another few times. By using select tangency and then in the lower box select other, it makes the selection a bit quicker for this particular item. We can use the select tangency option whenever we've got edges on a loop that are tangent to one another. Okay, and for that last one, and we just click recognize, and that's removed all of those cuts from the design. And even though it didn't pick up the patterns, we can group them back together again at a later stage. So don't worry if it doesn't pick them up automatically. I'm now going to recognize the hole through the center. And we just select the internal face to click and recognize that item. The rest of the model we can then recognize in a number of ways. We can put things on, like we could go through and we can use, for example, under the sheet metal features, the Mitre Flange option, which allows us to select a face and then the fixed face on the design and pick up those Mitre Flanges that run along the edge. If we were to select and hit the tick at this point and actually continue with the operation, it would use the Insert Bends tool, and it would just process those bends and then flatten them out again in order to give us a sheet metal flat pattern, but we wouldn't necessarily have a feature history to be able to edit. So what I'm going to do in this example is show you another way of doing it, and that's using the Sketch Bend tool, and that just allows us to select a fixed face, click Recognize, and it inserts sketch bends for all the rest of the bends within the model. The last feature we want to be able to pick up on is just the base flange. And I just click Recognize to pick that one up. So then through the model, you'll see that we can go through this, and we've got things like the holes and the sketch bends we inserted. These cut extrudes, obviously I want to group these together, and I want to find a pattern in this area. So I'm going to select a circular pattern for this example. And by searching selected features, we can make the selection a bit easier. I'll select all of the things in the loop and then hit the next, and it's found that pattern. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to hit the tick. It progressively builds up the model, and you can see how using the more advanced options allows us to get the design that we're looking for exactly, rather than SolidWorks doing a bit of a guess in certain areas. Okay, so we can focus down a bit closer on the results we're looking for. So I'll just hide away some of these items. Alright, what I'm going to do now is to close down this example, and I'm going to have a look at another one. The next example, I'm just showing how we can use some of the more advanced features for recognizing things like sweeps within FeatureWorks. Using the interactive mode is probably the easiest way of picking up certain features if you know what they are. And we can just pick up, using the standard features box, something like a boss sweep, which you'll see is available from the bottom of the list. The selection for this is quite simple. We just select the two end faces of that sweep. And I'll just click Recognize to run through that. And you'll see it's quite nicely picked up that sweep straight away. So the sweep that it's created, you'll see at the moment, if we edit this sketch, has a pretty much underdefined sketch. It has a view sketch relations added, but other than that, there isn't a lot of definition in here. It's fully able to sort of move around, and there's not a lot of constraining in place. I'm going to have a look at some of the options within FeatureWorks to help build up the kind of definition we've got within these sketches. So going back to the original example, the imported model, I'm going to right click and go down to the FeatureWorks and then Options. Within here, under the Dimensions and Relations box, I'm going to turn on the ability to enable auto dimensioning of sketches and adding constraints into sketch, so relations. And then we can select the kind of dimensioning scheme we're looking for. I want to go with the baseline dimensioning scheme, and I'm going to choose the ability to dimension this below the sketch and to the left of the sketch. And then I just click OK. Within this model now, if I run through FeatureWorks, it'll give me a better output. So my selection is the same. I just choose the boss sweep tool, select the two end faces of the model, click Recognize, and hit the tick. But this time it will build me up a fully defined sketch. You'll see in some areas that the sketch still has that minus sign next to it, so it's still a bit underdefined, but that is purely just the placement of the item with the relation to the origin point in the sketch model. So all we need to do is just link it in some way to that origin point, and you see then it becomes fully defined. And likewise for the other sketch, the actual shape of the item is fully defined, but it just needs hooking into something like this origin point here. And you see then that we've got a fully defined sketch as well. Okay, so having gone through those options, I'll hide away this item and we're going to have a look at another example now. Okay, I'll run import diagnostics, and again there's no problems with this model, and I'm going to run feature recognition. The first thing I'm going to do on this example, because you can see it's quite complicated, it's not always clear as to how a model like this might have been built. What we can do is we can go through the design and use the automatic features and get the model to try and pick up as best it can the kind of features within the model, and something like this can take quite a while to try and pick up, and you'll see that it's not doing a particularly good job actually picking up these features. It's making quite a mess of the kind of features that have been inserted. So we've still got an unrecognized body right in the center here, with the boss extrudes inserted all over the place, and then cut extrudes in other areas. So you can see it's quite a messy result that's been created. In order to deal with a model like this, sometimes the best thing to do is to use FeatureWorks and recognize features, but then use the interactive mode to then select a volume feature. A volume feature allows us to isolate some of the more complex areas in the design. So for example, I'm going to select all of the internal faces of this particular area in the model to then isolate them out of the design. It just take a minute just to select all of these features around the edge. Once you've got all those items selected, we can just click the Recognize button, and it isolates that particular area in the design and selects it as a volume within the model. We can then go through and recognize the other features in the design. So things like the holes in the model, and we can recognize patterns in certain areas or recognize similar. And it's managed to pick up similar features there. Then we can go through and just recognize a lost item, which is a boss extrude. Oops. So the top selection box is the top face, and then we go up to the underside face in the design. So having created that, we can hit the tick and we can see actually what the result is from this. So in any particularly complex areas of the design, we can use this Thickened Cut feature to actually cut out a particular area in the model. Essentially what it's done is it's isolated those areas and created a surface from them. If I just roll back up, we'll be able to see. I'll just show this particular feature and you'll be able to see the kind of surface that it's created in that area. And it just uses that surface to then cut away from the model. So it works quite well for any particularly complex areas. Last example I'm going to look through is another example that's just going to show some of the features we can work through just on a simple example using the interactive mode. Proceeding with feature recognition on this particular model, I'm going to use the interactive for all the selections. The first one of which is the fact that I'm going to pick up the fillet tools and the fillet features within this model. So when we select fillets within here, the best option to turn on is to chain the fillet features, which will then select any of the fillets which are tangent to the one you selected. And it does make the fillets a lot easier to select, and it means we can go around the design like I'm doing here, and I can select all of those items one by one. The selection can get slower and slower, so it is quite a good idea to split these fillet features up, if you can, into smaller parts of the design. So I'm going to actually select all of these items and recognize those as one group, and it will run through and actually pick up those items. And then on the items that are created from a fillet on the underside, I can recognize those again as a separate feature. Okay, in certain areas of the design, you'll see areas like this one, where it's not entirely clear, what's going on here. It could be a chamfer in some areas or fillet in others. You could try and analyze and work out which areas are which and pick those up from the model. But sometimes FeatureWorks can struggle with complex areas where you've got items overlapping or intersecting with each other. What we can do in certain areas like this one is to actually just delete these faces to remove them from the model. It means that then you can just reinsert those later on. And it helps just to take them out of the design and then allow you to actually get something out of the model for the features underneath. The next features I'm going to go through and recognize are the cut extrude features that go from the base here. And again, we can try and recognize a circular pattern in this area. Sometimes it will pick it up. Otherwise, if it doesn't, like it hasn't here, we can go through and actually group those in later on. So it's just a case of going through one by one and then selecting the items to then actually add the rest of the items in. And it doesn't take too long to just go through these selection boxes and do that. Okay, having gone through that selection, I can then recognize things like the hole running through the middle of the model and the boss extrude on the top. On the underside of the design, I'm going to recognize those parts of the model by choosing this face and then having it going up to this one here. And the last feature in the design is just a simple boss extrude as well. We can recognize that just with a selection from and to. So having gone through the design, then we can use those same selections we did earlier on to group items like these, or these cuts within the design as a pattern. So I'm going to find a circular pattern and select all of those items to be able to group them together. So once you've gone through a model on an item like this, you can then hit the tick. It will then create the features, and this time using that fully defined sketch tool, it will have fully defined those sketches that just need a bit of placement in terms of the origin. So in terms of those sketches, it does become a lot quicker for actually defining them in position. You see with an item like this one, it just needs hooking into something like the origin point. Or for sketches further down the design, like this one here, well, we just need some kind of placement onto, say, a corner point of the design. You need just simple relationships, just need adding in, just to hold the items in place in relationship to the rest of the model. Okay, you'll see certain items just need hooking in place, and again, you've got a point at the center to do that. and the rest of the features are now fully defined. And you can just get rid of those sketch planes that have just been inserted in the model that help with the creation of the design. So having built up something like this, you could then go through the model and make certain changes. For example, you could go into the design and you could edit the amount of items in the circular pattern. You could reduce the amount of items down to something like 7. Just make sure equal spacing is turned on. It's going to cause a slight problem for the fillets, but then you can just make slight adjustments for those. What it essentially allows us to do is allows us to go into a design like this one and be able to make changes to it where we couldn't do before a lot easier. We could add, say, a fillet back onto this edge at a certain size to actually finish that off and get it back to how we want it. And you could just adjust this fillet to then remove any missing edges within here. And that gets rid of any problems. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good idea of how to use FeatureWorks and how to take advantage of it within SolidWorks. Thanks very much for watching. I'll point out the future webinars we've got coming up. Next week we've got one on configurations, and after that we've got webinars dealing with validation tools and assembly visualization tools. I also wanted to point out we've got a customer day coming up on the 10th of October. It's a preview of the new version of SolidWorks 2013 at the Air Show in Duxford. Please get in touch with us if you do want to come along. Thanks very much for watching.